Hey everyone, this is Louis7 and I have some news for the Update 30 beta in the Lord of the Rings Online. I know I'm a little bit late to this because the beta did start a couple days ago, but the name of the update is Blood of Azog, and one of the main features of it is actually going to be the interlude, which is called Blood of Azog. I'll get into more details on that in a moment because there are quite a few things coming in this update. There will be that continued storyline, which is the Blood of Azog. It's a prelude actually to the Gundabad expansion, which will of course be coming later this year as Update 31. In addition to that, there's a new zone called Azanulbizar, which is going to essentially be like a Mordor Besieged for the Dimrill Dale. It's set in the Third Age in 2799, so sometime in the past during the battle with Durin's Bane, I believe. In addition to those two things, we will be getting a new raid, which is going to be the Fall of Khazad-dûm, and as far as I know, that might be like a single boss raid, but I have not actually experienced it to know for sure what is included with that. But there's more significance actually coming with endgame and raiding in general, which is a huge amount of changes actually for class balance, and this is something that has not come to LOTRO in a long time. It's actually really surprising to me, even though there's been a lot of talk about class balance. I did not expect to see anything until after the Brawler class was released and like after the Gundabad expansion, so this is very exciting to look through all this stuff, which we'll get to in a moment. And I do want to point out the background gameplay is mostly going to be me playing through some of the new missions coming in the update on the classes that have received some balance changes in the beta. But those are the main features, it looks like, of the update for what we have at least in round 1. So to start covering some of the main content features of the update, we do have the interlude Blood of Azog, which will of course be level 130 content and continuing with the general storyline that we have seen with the Legacy of Durin and the Trials of Dwarves. Now, while this is actually set after the War of Three Peaks, your character will actually experience a bunch of events that occurred in Middle-earth's history. So I personally think that will be very interesting to actually explore when the update comes out. And the next major content piece is going to be the Tales of Yore, as they're calling it, with Azanulbizar. Now, Azanulbizar is going to be a new zone, and it is set in the Dimrill Dale location, but in the past, during the Third Age, and for anybody familiar with the Lord of the Rings timeline, is going to be set during 2799. Now, this zone will be level 130, but in addition to the fresh level 130 zone that we're getting, which is again just a past version of what we already have in the Dimrill Dale, there are going to be some updates to the current regular Dimrill Dale that we have, which is roughly upper 50s to around level 60 in terms of level, which appears right now just to be visual updates rather than actual content updates. But either way, I'm actually excited to explore what changes there are to the current Dimrill Dale because my lore master just went through the content. So I think it would be very neat for me to actually go back to that and see what changed. And by the way, to actually go into some details on this Tales of Yore with Azanulbizar, it is going to take place during the 6th War of the Dwarves and Orcs, again, which I think deals with Durin's Bane ultimately. At least the raid, I believe, deals with Durin's Bane, which I think takes place during the same time. And speaking of the raid, it actually looks like the LOTRO team developers, Standing Stone Games, are very interested in the balance of that and just the general raiding experience going along with that. And it's something I have not actually seen in any of the recent betas or just any updates in general recently with LOTRO. There have been some like strives towards, I think, improving the endgame and raiding experience in general, but this beta with actual notes of raid playtests and the such, to me at least, truly emphasizes that they are working on improving endgame and balance and the such. And also, speaking of balance, it actually says in the patch notes that there are going to be a series of class balance adjustments that they are working on for the coming months. So what we have here, while there are a lot of updates coming to the different classes, what we have here is potentially only a small set of many changes that will be coming to hopefully improve the class balance overall, because there are a lot of issues with class balance. It's been an ongoing issue with the game that many players have been a little bit upset about. Even myself, I feel like class balance could be a lot better, and this looks like they are starting to make steps towards improving that. So one of the big features you will find in this update, in this beta at least, is actually a nerf to a lot of buffs and debuffs, because they consider a lot of these buffs and debuffs overpowered, especially considering like fellowships and raids in particular. And the way these buffs and debuffs worked is essentially high tier raiding especially is impossible without core support classes such as the Burglar, Lore Master, and Captain and the such. So potentially with this update, maybe some other classes could shine, or you could even run through the content without any of these core support classes. While the support classes should definitely still be helpful, they still will have buffs and debuffs. That is just a potential change to look out for, that if you do play with a kinship or something that just doesn't have a Lore Master, such as my kinship, then maybe you will have an easier time on the content and not feel as punished for not having somebody play a Lore Master in your group. That's at least my hope from the update. And kind of my takeaway with that, you have more flexibility in your class composition, which I always believe is a good thing. I just really believe that each class and each spec should have a purpose in a raid and not be totally 100% outclassed or even 100% required compared to something else. But I think that is enough on my background and opinion on class balance in general, and let's go ahead and actually start looking at some of the notes that we have here. And I do want to point out the main classes that actually got changed are going to be the Beorning, the Burglar got some minor reworks, and then the Captain, especially the tanking with the Captain, as well as the Guardian, notably not yet the tanking at least with the Guardian. The Redline and damage of skills is mainly what was adjusted with them, and also the Lore Master and Runekeeper were updated. A lot of classes that I feel like could use updating, so that is really nice to see. It's also important to point out this is only phase 1 of the beta, so there could potentially even be more changes that are not actually in the notes yet or not actually in the beta yet. So that is just something to look out for in the future. And I'm thinking about doing a whole video breaking down the actual class balance changes in more detail, so today I just want to give a brief overview along with this patch overview video that we have. So starting off with the Beorning, one of the major features is they are increasing the damage of a lot of skills, but they're also changing the way Expose works, which is the Redline debuff. When Exposed is used in bear form, it will increase incoming melee and range damage, and when used in man form, it will increase incoming tactical and range damage. So that is a debuff that you could actually look to using and maintaining both in man and bear form with your Beorning. Also, a notable change with Vigilant Roar is it no longer taunts by default. You will actually have to get the trait in the blue line for that, so you can use it as sort of a DPS rotation type skill potentially in bear form and can at least squeeze out some more damage. Alright, so moving on to the Burglar, one of the major features with them is they have nerfed the debuffs with the Burglars like a lot of other classes that we will be getting to. So this just might have a slight impact on their exact usefulness in certain situations. Next up, we do have the Captain, and as I mentioned, the primary change to the Captain is actually with their tanking. Actually, the first line in the notes is their ability to maintain high and extended degrees of invulnerability that has made them irreplaceable in highly challenging content, so they're trying to limit some of that. And for anybody that doesn't know, among many reasons, one of the big reasons captains are highly valued as tanks is because they can become invulnerable and essentially invincible, unkillable for a little bit of a duration, and it makes it so that no other tanks are actually desired compared to the captain. But it looks like that is the primary target of this first phase of changes with the captain. There's also a note on the Captain Banner Heralds, which were not correctly inheriting offensive bonuses from their summoner, so potentially your Heralds could also be a little bit more helpful in combat, it looks like. To get a little bit into the details with the yellow line changes, so their morale bonus, captains are also well known for their huge morale pools. It looks like that will be nerfed a little bit. In addition to the morale adjustments, they are making a change to a couple of the cooldown skills of the captain, which is really the primary source of their invulnerability. There is one additional change coming to the captain in the beta, which is with the Redline Telling Mark skill, which has had its effect reduced to kind of align with all the general support nerfs that we are getting in this update. And moving on, the next class to get some major changes is the Guardian, and one of the big ones is actually with Sting, which will have its cooldown reduced by half a second just so you can do a little bit more weaving with that skill. That is something that, as a DPS Guardian, it is good to practice. For anybody unfamiliar, just try to weave in Sting as often as you can because it does a lot of damage and it's very, very fast to use. So in addition to that change, just a lot of damage boost for the Guardian, as well as the damage of a significant number of skills has just been boosted. It will be worth looking to see which skills are actually the strongest after this update. Next up we have the Lore Master, which as a support class, of course its debuffs have gotten nerfed in this beta. So Fire Lore and Frost Lore received pretty significant debuffs by 25 and 20% respectively. Also Wind Lore has actually been buffed to make it a little bit better, and the duration of that has been increased, so you do not have to cast it quite as frequently. And then finally the Lore Master has had some of its skills buffed so they can do a little bit more damage. So perhaps with the Lore Master, to make up for their relatively less strong support and less strong debuffs, they might offer a little bit increased sustained damage even as a Yellow Line Lore Master. And moving on, we have the Runekeeper as the last class to receive major changes. So it looks like in the first beta preview we have the Redline Fire Runekeeper as the primary target, and it looks like the Mystifying Flames debuff that is a trait in the Redline that will affect all incoming damage and not just fire, which might have huge implications on the effectiveness of a Redline Runekeeper as actually providing valuable debuffs because it would significantly increase the damage that enemies would take from fire damage. The problem is there are not many people who would actually do fire damage, so it affecting all incoming damage could boost the effectiveness of a Runekeeper, especially if you have a lot of people in a raid, for example, where they can take advantage of that debuff. Additionally, there were changes to Fire Ridicule with its damage over time. It now has pulses every 3 seconds rather than every 2 seconds, with damage increase on that as well. And in addition to that, the Redline skills have had some damage buffs. And one skill of note that I do want to point out in this video is Scathing Mockery, which is a skill that I believe has been infamous for being very weak and it being very hard to feel the value out of that skill. So potentially it is a skill that might become a lot more useful even in shorter duration fights. And that is something just to look out for. And with that, we have overviewed the 4 major features that are coming in the update, with the new storyline, the new zone, and the new raid, and finally the class balance changes. There are a few additional more minor things coming, but the first I want to cover is actually the raid revive limits because it goes in line with what we have been covering. Now with this, they are experimenting. This is something that is not completely set in stone, but they are experimenting with a new mechanic where you have a limit on the number of revives you can use in raids. So for people unfamiliar, there are a lot of in-combat reses in LOTRO, and there are no limit on how many of those you can use. A captain can res 2 players at once, for example. A Baronings have an in-combat res, Minstrel has an in-combat res as well. And even the Runekeeper does with Do Not Fall. They can actually maintain that if you have the Legendary Legacy on 2 players at once. So there are a lot of in-combat reses in LOTRO, and it looks like they're trying to limit that so you don't do like 20 reses or something in the middle of a raid fight. You can only do, for example, maybe 3. So if you are interested in the exact details of how they are limiting this, I recommend you read the patch notes, but it looks like they're experimenting with like every so many minutes in a fight, they actually say X minutes in a fight, your fellowship will receive like a revive token, and this revive token will allow your group to use one of their in-combat res skills. So for example, you might start with 3 in-combat reses, and then you might regenerate one of those every 10 minutes in an encounter, and of course this resets at the end of a boss fight. So this is something I am actually interested in how this will play out. It sounds like the restrictions for this might be looser in lower tiers and might not even come into play in tier 1. It might only be implemented for tier 2 and higher, for example, so it looks like they're just experimenting with this, and I am interested to see where it goes when the update actually comes out. And alright, we are finally getting into some of the final sections for this beta. Again, a lot going on, very exciting stuff going on in this update, but there are a couple changes to housing items just in general. But next up, for the last major section, we have the quest and adventure areas, and it looks like there is a little bit of a change coming to missions with the Gabalaka Stable Masters. You might see those, they're the recruiters for the missions for War of Three Peaks. They're actually being changed to mission recruiters, and they will allow any player to travel to any of the missions that are in the game. So both the Wildwood missions and the War of Three Peaks missions, as well as the new Update 30 missions with Azanulbizar and all that. Actually, the new Update 30 missions, I haven't gone too much detail into those, I realize, seem to be spread throughout Eriador. Actually, I've gone through a few you might see in the gameplay in Angmar, Misty Mountains, and in the Dimrall Dale area. There are also a few bug fixes, but the one that I want to point out today is that torch-carrying elves and high elf runekeepers will no longer T-pose. This is always sad when you can't T-pose anymore, but that will be changed, it looks like, in Update 30. Now that we are through the main chunk of the video, I do want to point out I plan to stream this beta and explore a lot more on Friday, May 21st, of course on my YouTube in the evening time, and I will schedule that. So you can be on the lookout for that if you are interested. And I do want to briefly summarize what we did have coming in this update because there is a lot here. So we do have a new interlude, which I believe will function like the interlude with the Shades of the Swamp before the Minas Morgul expansion, and that will be with the War of Three Peaks, and then we will have the Tales of Yore with Azanulbizar, which is the new level 130 zone coming. That is the Third Age 2799 version of the Dimeral Dale, essentially, and that comes with its own storyline and all the regular zone stuff. In addition to that, we're getting a new 12-man raid, and a lot of class balance work and endgame stuff in general, as well as some experimental changes with revive limits. Those are my main takeaways from this update, and with that, I hope you all did enjoy this video and learned something useful. And I hope you all are also as excited as I am to finally be exploring all this stuff in the beta and eventually when it comes out live. And if you did enjoy, please consider liking and subscribing for more or becoming a channel member to support the content, and thanks for watching everyone.